Afternoon, everyone. We've reached February at last. I've got a bit of a different background today because I'm back in the office, and unfortunately I think it makes my hair look even greasier than normal, so that's a good start. But so very warm welcome to Stewarts Soundbites this afternoon. We're back for another brilliant 15-minute session, and I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by Bev Palmer. Now, Bev, as you'll have seen from all life, is a behaviour specialist, and we're talking about something really interesting and really practically important, actually. And when Bev contacted me and said, I think we should talk about the liminal space, I kind of said, the what now? I did my Bev. I was explaining this to me. So we're going to start on that. But it's actually a really fascinating subject. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Bev. Thank you for agreeing to be here. And can we just kick off then, Bev, on that note, by just providing us with kind of a brief explanation as to what we're talking about when we refer to the liminal space?
Yeah, of course you can. So the liminal space is a concept, really, and the word liminality comes from the Latin word limen, which basically means a threshold. So it's if you imagine it in visual terms, it's like a corridor between one room getting to the next room. So it's a space in between, and it's a space of transition. It's a space that can be very uncomfortable for people because it's a way of letting go of who they were and who they knew themselves to be, to discovering who they are now. And for a lot of the clients that I work with and a lot of clients that you guys work with, they've had catastrophic injury. They've had something very traumatic happen to them that has changed their whole life. And so in that space, that liminal space, they're lost. Some will fight to hold on to who they were and will due to lack of insight and lack of understanding of the challenges ahead, will be in denial about the change and still keep hanging on. But essentially they're in that liminal space. And my role essentially in that is to identify the fact that they're in it and to work with them while they're in it.
Right. And how easy or difficult is it to identify when somebody is in that space? And another thing that I was just thinking about was, are there certain people or certain type of injuries that make a category of people more likely to fall into that liminal space? They're more prone to it.
I think that's a really good question, and the answer to that is that anybody can be in the liminal space. The liminal space is determined by a significant change in an individual's life. So that can happen to any of us through loss and change. So we could lose a loved one. We could have an injury where we lose a leg, or any other limb. We can have a significant brain injury. And it's not just the client themselves that falls into that liminal space. It's the family, the partners, the siblings. So anybody can actually be in that liminal space. And the way that part of the question that you asked was, how does one recognize that? How does one notice when somebody's in that space? And it's usually when they are focused primarily on the past, constantly drawing everyone's attention to the past, and they're not able to move forward, not able to make those adjustments and those changes, and it's deeply emotional, deeply psychological, that they're almost searching and yearning. So it's a grief process of wanting to hold on to themselves, holding on to the person that they used to be. And so there is an incredible resistance in that place. So most people in an MDT that work together in supporting clients with catastrophic injury often will notice that they're not achieving goals. We're not able to move the client forward in any way. And there's a cost implication to that. There's an emotional implication to that. And of course, what we want to stay out of in that liminal space is any blame or sense that someone's failing, because it is a process. So we have tasks to do in order to move somebody through that space, but we also need to adhere to the process. And that process is to ensure that what we're doing with our client is to come alongside them, to validate their experience, to empathize with their situation, and to stay with them for as long as is necessary in order for them to process the grief part of it before they can move on and contemplate the task part of it. Whereas often we tend to force the task, and the task seems more important and we forget the process.
Yeah.
And the liminal space is about acknowledging that both are equally important, really.
It's so interesting because actually it must be so natural for anybody in this space, whether it's because of a catastrophic injury or not, to think, what do I need to do to go back to the way things were, and to kind of rejoin what is familiar to me. It's so natural, and it's kind of, you know, I wonder how important it is for somebody in the liminal space to understand that that's where they are, and to understand, and this goes to the point of kind of insight as well, doesn't it, what their adjusted reality is. And what I'm really interested to know, Bev, is a wee bit about kind of practically speaking how that transition kind of occurs.
Yeah. So because the liminal space, liminality is a concept, it's about, and it's abstract. So one of the things that I will do is make that more concrete for the client.
Yeah.
So I will draw it out for them. So I will draw what looks like a pit. So it's just a square box without a lid. And I will draw a sad face on one side, and then a more a kind of happier face on the other side. And we talk about this being the liminal space, this being that transition space, that stuck space, whatever it is for that client. So the first thing we do is begin to identify on the one side all the things they've lost, all the things that matter to them. And the list can be endless, you know, it goes on. And what's important, and what I've noticed that becomes a theme for every client I've worked with, is that for the first time, they're fully acknowledging that loss. They're fully seeing what is. Now, some people can say, well, isn't that awful? Aren't they going to just sink into a depression about that? Well, my guess is that they know what they've lost already, but we need to name it. And we need to account for it. And when we've accounted for it, then that something settles in the client, as in, oh, I feel heard. I feel understood, that yes, this is how big this is for me. So then I'll show them the pit, and I write the word pit as an acronym and say, place yourself where you think you are in this pit. And most will tend to say at the bottom, stuck. And then we look at the acronym of PITS, and P standing for purpose. What is my purpose now? Yeah, I've lost my purpose. Who I was, what I did is no longer the same. So we will explore what that purpose is moving forward for them. Then the I stands for identity. Who am I now? Yeah, I was a dad, I was a worker, I was a colleague, I was this, I was that. And now I can't be that person anymore. So who am I? So these are big existential questions that people are going to be asking, and they have a right to be asked it. And then the T is for task. What do I need to do now that was different from before? And the S stands for support. What support do I need now that I didn't ever ask for before, didn't ever need before, but now I need?
Yeah.
So you're shifting their focus into acknowledging, and because you're making what is an abstract concept into something a little bit more concrete, they get it, they can work with it, and they begin to see it in ways that make sense to them. And then what I'll do is I'll draw a ladder out of the pits and say to them, where do you think you are now on that ladder? So they might say, well, now I've got an understanding of why I feel so awful or feel so stuck. I feel I'm at least at the ladder.
Yeah.
And then in the rungs of the ladder, we can put things like, well, clearly you need some physio to enable you to recover some of your physical ability. So we'll write physio on the ladder, and then OT or any other therapies that are going to be part of that support system and part of the tasks of getting them moving. But of course, their purpose and identity can take longer. Because that has to be the period of adjustment until they can get to the other side. So shifting from an abstract concept into a more concrete concept and making that visual for clients is a very powerful tool.
And presumably it takes a lot of time for some clients, and presumably some of them will transition out of it fairly swiftly. I mean, what strikes me actually as you were talking there, Bev, is how applicable this is not only to the types of clients that we deal with who have suffered this huge sense of change and loss, but actually can apply equally to all of us in a certain way. I was thinking about myself, I'm thinking, oh, I felt a bit like that, you know, whenever I had my son and kind of what's going on. And of course, this is not about me, but I just thought it was an interesting point, you know, to kind of think about an adjusted phase of life in practical terms.
I think what you're saying there is it's about being kind to oneself. It's about acknowledging that we will all enter a liminal space at some point in our life. And for some of us, we will go in and out of it. And that can be many, many times in our life. But sometimes when there is catastrophic injury or there's catastrophic loss, you get stuck in it.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is that stuck place isn't we don't attribute blame or failure to either therapists or the litigators or the client or the family. I think what's important is to identify, is this client stuck? And if they're stuck, are they stuck in the liminal space? How am I a part of the process of helping them out of that? Because it's not just down to one person, it's down to us all having an increased awareness and insight into ourselves to bring the compassion that is necessary to enable people to make that journey. And of course, we all have hurry up drivers. We want to see people transition quickly. We want them out of pain.
Yeah.
But we sometimes can't rush that process. And that process, as you say, can take longer for some than it does for others. And I'm thinking particularly for brain injured clients who at that point are lacking insight and awareness. We may not be able to transition them as smoothly or as quickly as we like, but actually we can support the family in their liminal space to move so that their responses to their loved ones are different, more supported, and made better.
Yeah. And one thing I think when you mention kind of brain injured clients particularly, I suppose there are a whole host of kind of things going on with an individual, usually, you know, least of all, you know, cognitive deficits, and there are a lot of kind of processes running at the same time with someone with a catastrophic brain injury. And how do we kind of go about figuring out to what extent they're being impacted by existing in this liminal space, and to what extent all of these other kind of issues going on feed into that? How is it possible to separate them all?
I think it's partially possible. I don't think there is, it's clear. It's not, there's no sort of delinearizing it. There's no way of going, oh, well, this belongs to this belongs to that. I think it's about ensuring that all of us have enough insight and awareness to notice when things are not progressing at a pace that feels healthy and supportive. Yeah. And I think if we notice that there is stuckness, I worked with a brain injured client who was very, very stuck and had been stuck because a lot of the developmental stuff hadn't been done. Yeah. So we identified that that was part of the stuckness. And so we caught that bit up and did a lot of work. And the client, I used films that the client was massively into, and he had a series of films all over the shelves in his wall. So we used that as a metaphor. So we took a particular film and he said, oh, so what you're asking me to do is it's like the Minotaur entering the maze. And in order for the Minotaur not to get lost and to be able to come back out of it, he's got to hold on to the rope. And I said, yes, and while you can't hold on to your own rope, I will hold it for you. So there's something here about holding the client's hope. Mm-hmm. So because there's a hopelessness in that liminal space, because you've let go of one thing and not yet grabbed hold of the other. Mm-hmm. So it feels hopeless and helpless. So we as therapists, as litigators, whoever is supporting that client can hold their hope until they can grasp that rope themselves and find them their way out of the maze.
Yeah, it's a really powerful visual, actually. Bev, and even as you talked about kind of the pit and stuff, it must be such a helpful tool for lots of clients, particularly those with kind of insight problems, but maybe to some extent, maybe later on down the line. But I've also thought it was an interesting point that you raised, bearing in mind that we've only got about 1 minute left. I also thought it was interesting that you mentioned kind of family as well, friends, carers, kind of supporters of somebody that has sustained catastrophic injury and might find themselves in this space. Is that just kind of a game changer for somebody, for the family to understand this concept?
Absolutely. I'm finding a lot of my support and work now is with families, and actually it's been a very powerful tool to bring about really positive change, because families unconsciously can sabotage. They can through their lack of understanding, they can be frustrated with their own partners or children or clients, and it's about making sure that we remove those barriers to success, that we begin to use healthy language that enables everyone to see that this is partly a normal process that one has to go through, and that they will come out the other side of that. And the family are integral to that. The support mechanisms around any client, they offer scaffolding. And so let's ensure the scaffolding poles also understand the liminal space and the concept, so that they can stand firm and stand supportive, because then working together and collaboratively, we're going to make movement and progress rather than hit barrier after barrier.
Yeah, and we see that time and time again, don't we, in all aspects of rehab, with the clients that we deal with, that kind of approach that is client-centered, but with the family on board, and all of that support network kind of understand what's happening as well. We see it all the time, and it's interesting to see that it applies equally to what we've been speaking about today.
Absolutely.
Now, you and I, we talked about this for about an hour last week, Bev, so we could go on and on and on about this, but we've run out of time. If there are any questions arising from this, then please do email them to me, and I'll get in touch with Bev and we'll sort out an answer for you. That was really very useful and interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.
Bye.